I think it's safe to say that Hannibal didn't exactly garner the praise of its predecessor.
It's more of a gore fest than a psychological thriller, and the decision to show the cannibalism in graphic detail, I think, is a huge mistake. Instead of being terrifying, Hannibal is just disgusting.
Although the movie is made with craft and skill and it has fine performances, it doesn't have the focus and the power of the first one, and I agree with you, thumbs down.
But it did rake in enough at the box office to warrant continuing the franchise. The problem was that Thomas Harris hadn't written the next book in the series. So what do? Why, you revisit an earlier chapter in the story. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Red Dragon. Since they're both based on the same book, the plot is generally the same as Manhunter. Years after catching Dr. Hannibal Lecter, criminal profiler Will Graham is called out of retirement to investigate a new series of strange murders. These were committed by a twisted individual nicknamed the Tooth Fairy, and Will must use all of the resources at his disposal and understand the mindset of this killer if he hopes to stop him. Now right off the bat, you might be thinking, is this as good as Manhunter? No, but that doesn't mean it's not worth watching. One of its greatest advantages comes from narrowing the scope and downplaying the silliness, giving us a smaller story that harkens back to what drew people to Silence of the Lambs. However, this also proves to be one of its detriments, as it tends to feel derivative at times. Many elements here feel very familiar, right down to some of the same sets and scenarios. We have another serial killer and another conflicted hero having to use Hannibal Lecter's expertise to solve the mystery. To his credit, though, director Brett Ratner tries to differentiate this one from its predecessors. Yeah, you heard right. Brett Ratner directed this. It doesn't even seem like one of his. I mean, I can understand Rush Hour, Tower Heist, and even Hercules, but Red Dragon? It sticks out like a sore thumb on his filmography. All things considered, this should have been a disaster, which makes it all the more surprising that it works. Part of that can be attributed to the Tim Burton-esque style. The whole world looks darker and more sinister than in the previous movies, and Danny Elfman's chillingly gothic musical score further strengthens the atmosphere. Unfortunately, there are several times when the filmmakers sacrifice subtlety in favor of flashiness. For instance, every time something remotely significant or weird happens, there's a musical indication like this. It's like the movie is shouting, "Look how horrifying it is!" To be honest, it gets kind of repetitive. Just think of other things that this music could be applied to. Maybe it's designed to compensate for the flawed storytelling. It's not like the plot itself is conveyed poorly, it just doesn't flow as well as it could. This is probably due to the fact that, in addition to telling a dual story with Will and the Tooth Fairy, the film also increases Lecter's screen time as a result of his popularity. While the script does an admirable job of balancing the plot threads and developing the characters, there are still several points when rushed scenes will follow what came before without much in the way of lead-ins or transitions. In spite of these issues, the acting remains a strong point in this one. Anthony Hopkins thankfully tones down the campiness that he displayed in the previous film. He still relishes in his evil deeds, but he's noticeably calmer and more subtle in his condescending menace. Sort of like a heightened version of his performance in Silence of the Lambs. Then there's Edward Norton. He's perfectly fine as Will Graham, but frankly, he plays it too safe. He credibly conveys the character's grim determination and no-nonsense attitude, but I never really believed him when he adopted the mindset of a murderer. He's missing the mystique and disturbed imagination that William Peterson brought to the role. Faring better is Harvey Keitel as Jack Crawford. He employs a more down-to-earth demeanor and natural gruffness while providing an understated gravitas to many of his scenes. We also have Philip Seymour Hoffman in an amusingly smug performance as Freddie Lowndes, managing to be even sleazier than Stephen Lang in spite of his limited screen time. Seriously, he's greasier than McDonald's food. However, one member of the cast who doesn't get much to work with is Mary-Louise Parker as Will's wife. She's alright when she's there, but she lacks the emotional warmth that Kim Graced had. The character of Reba is far more memorable, thanks in no small part to Emily Watson. She lends an awkward outcast quality that suits the character and makes you believe that she would fall for a fellow misfit like the Tooth Fairy. Speaking of which, we now come to the most engrossing performance in the film. Ralph Fiennes as Francis Dollarhide. Not only does he channel the emotional vulnerability of a battered child, but he's also very intimidating with his powerful presence and raw intensity. In this iteration of the story, the script spends much more time fleshing out his character, and Fiennes takes full advantage of that. He's honestly one of the most compelling aspects of the whole movie. I don't mean to discredit the film's other strengths, though, as there is admittedly a lot to like in Red Dragon. Although it's flashy to a fault and suffers the occasional hiccup in storytelling, it's ultimately redeemed by passionate performances, an effective musical score, a creepily gothic atmosphere, and a return to the smaller scale thrills that attracted audiences to the franchise in the first place. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, and/or comment. Until next time.